Welcome back to the Alice Stewart Show. 646. Campaign 2014 is underway. Musical chairs is going on across the state on who's in and who's out and who's going to run, who will not run, who will run for re-election. And the table is being set in many races, and the most recent being that Congressman Tom Cotton has decided he will run against Senator Pryor. We expect an official announcement tomorrow night to come, and we'll speak with the congressman on our show on Wednesday morning. But that certainly set the stage for other candidates to announce where they're going to run. But without a doubt, that race, the re-election race for Senator Mark Pryor, is one of the most watched in the country. We hear repeatedly Senator Pryor is the most vulnerable senator in the country on national news outlets, and poll after poll indicates as such. And we have a new poll that we're going to talk about that does show trouble for Senator Pryor. Here to talk about that is the communications director for the Republican Party of Arkansas, David Ray. David, good morning.
Good morning, Alice. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad you could join us. This latest poll was done by Magellan Strategies, and it shows that Pryor's re-election is in jeopardy.
Yeah, absolutely. This was not a head-to-head poll. What this poll tested and surveyed was the attitudes and opinions of likely midterm voters statewide in Arkansas and how they feel about Mark Pryor. As they ask about his general favorable, unfavorable, similar to an approval rating. They ask about some issue questions that will probably shape the race, and really the results are not good for Mark Pryor. The survey finds only 37% of likely midterm voters supported his reelection. That is a dangerously low number for an incumbent U.S. senator, and it's even more disturbing for the Democrats if you look at the previous polling that's been released in this race, because the numbers on the two previous polls that have been released are very, very similar, and his hard reelect number moves somewhere between 35 and 41. And it has not gone any higher than that.
Right, and I think you hit a key point here, is that this is not a head-to-head. This is not, would you vote for Pryor over Cotton or vice versa. These are more on the issues and likelihood of them voting for him. And you said 37% of midterm voters would support his reelection. And for someone that's it's a popular, well-liked senator, 37% is not a good number when he's in the incumbent moving forward. But what this poll does, it looks at specific issues, and one of them being immigration. He didn't do well there. But more than anything, what we saw in the last midterm, Blanche Lincoln, Obamacare was the nail in her coffin. And here we have, yet again, Obamacare, and we see it. This is the question 12 on this poll. Mark Pryor supported Obamacare, which in some states has increased premiums 88%. How does that affect your vote? And that's harmful to him. His vote for Obamacare is harmful to him, right, David?
It's absolutely harmful. In fact, I would say it's almost crippling. That almost 60.5% of the electorate says, "Yeah, that makes us less likely to vote for you," knowing that you went to Washington and sided with Barack Obama to pass this health care legislation. And Alice, I would argue that somebody who only has the approval of 37% of their constituents is in fact not very popular. But if you look at how this state has been trending, look, Blanche Lincoln lost her 2010 race and only received 37% of the vote. Then fast forward to 2012, Barack Obama only received 37% of the vote in his race against Mitt Romney. So I think this is indicative. This race, as we said, is not a true head-to-head ballot test, but it's very indicative of where the generic ballot, what pollsters refer to as the generic ballot, falls for Republicans. And that generic ballot, if you look at question 3, 4, and 5 on this survey, shows is that the generic ballot right now stands at about 47% for Republicans and 37% for Democrats. And that basically says, for listeners who aren't familiar with polling lingo, the generic ballot basically says if you have two candidates and the voters don't know much about them other than party affiliation, which one would you prefer? And that's a serious, serious problem for Mark Pryor.
Absolutely. So with more leaning towards Republican, and it's no secret this is a red state. He is a Democratic senator running for re-election, and he's got an uphill battle just from that standpoint alone, but also his voting record, voting 93% of the time with President Obama's agenda. That's something that people do not like, don't support.
That's absolutely right. And I think what the polling shows is that the two parts of the Obama agenda that voters like the least, at least of the ones that were tested, were Obamacare and the stimulus. And those votes rank very closely. I know Obamacare gets a lot of attention, but the fact that Mark Pryor has gone to Washington and just contributed over and over to adding more and more to our national debt, to running up our deficits, to spending money we don't have, and then kicking the can down the road so that our children and grandchildren have to pay the bills, we have to remember that is just as effective a message as Obamacare is. So it's very important that we highlight both of those distinctions in the upcoming election.
Right. And it's interesting to note in this particular poll done by Magellan, toward the end when they asked who was actually being polled, 31% are Democrats and 28% are Republicans. So here we have people that identify themselves as Democrat but still not likely to vote for Senator Pryor. But let me ask you this, David. Clearly, Senator Pryor's got to be doing some polling as well, and we're not hearing anything about that.
Well, that's the thing. You would think a man who has been rated by publications like National Journal and Roll Call as the most vulnerable senator in the country would want to hit back on this notion that he's only got the support of 37% of his constituents. But surprisingly, they've not released any polling information. But when you look at his second quarter FEC report, you find out that he's conducted $45,000 worth of polling in the last 3 months. So where is this information? And that's fine. Campaigns it's their prerogative not to release their polling data. But at the same time, you can't sit here and, if you're a Democrat, you can't sit here and say, oh, he's not vulnerable, he's not unpopular, because all of the polling that has come forward that's been released publicly shows a very, very, very similar trend in that his strong reelect number is somewhere in that 35 to 40 range. And as anyone knows, in a two-way race, you got to have 50 plus 1. So he's not even close to that mark. And it doesn't look like there's much potential for him to get there.
Right. And without knowing the results of their own polling data, the fact that it has not been released is quite telling.
It suggests to me that their polling is probably pretty similar to the numbers that have been released publicly. That's what that seems to indicate.
All right, and one last question. My guest, David Ray, the communications director for the Republican Party of Arkansas. David, the race is on now. Will be officially tomorrow evening when Congressman Cotton announces he's running against Senator Pryor. But this is going to be a heated race. There's going to be a lot of money pumped in from D.C. and across the country. How do you see this playing out? Do you see it being dirty? You see it being on the issues? How do you predict this race playing out?
Well, as you mentioned, this is going to be a very nationally watched race. It's going to be nationally watched because which party controls the U.S. Senate is going to be in play. Republicans have a chance to win that back. But it's going to be very, very important for Arkansas because we need a U.S. Senator who's going to go to Washington and vote to represent the will of his constituents. And so when you look at these numbers with Mark Pryor at 37%, he's got a very steep hill to climb. And in my opinion, I think that's why he's gone so negative in the last week. I think if we look ahead to this week, their campaign will probably continue to be very negative. And I think we'll see that going forward because really that's his only play here, right, is to try and make his opponent just as unpopular as he is.
Right. We'll see. It's going to be a heated race, that's for sure, and it kicks off tomorrow when Congressman Cotton makes the announcement official. David Ray, the spokesman for Arkansas Republican Party, thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Have a great day, Alice.
All right, same to you. We'll take a quick break and wrap things up on the first hour of the Alice Stewart Show right after this.
You make me wanna roll my windows down.